Okay, welcome to the regular meeting of the Design and Historic Review Commission. It is Thursday, July 25th at 10:02 a.m. Before we start, if everybody could put their phones on silent or vibrate, please. We'll call the meeting to order, and we established that we do have a quorum. Our first order of business will be the consent agenda. Has everyone had a chance to look at that? Can I get a motion to approve?
Motion to approve.
And a second. We have a motion and a second.
Second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye, motion passes. We will now move into our regular agenda. Our first case is RC 24-15, 1173 Benedict Drive, a request for design approval of a monument sign replacement, new entry gates, a new playground shade sail, and like replacements of basketball hoops, light pole fixtures, and windows for an apartment complex located at 1173 Benedict Drive.
Thank you. Good morning. Austin Reed, planner. This request comes to you out of District Number 3, Harry Thomas's district. We are in the Fort Concho East neighborhood. The zoning for this area is RS1 single-family residential. This is a 14-acre lot that's currently being used as an apartment complex. As you can see from the graphic, we're in the river corridor overlay here. Some of the proposed work includes refacing an existing monument sign, new electric entry gates around the property, a new playground shade sail that's going over an existing playground, and then some minor like-for-like replacements around the property. So here's just some site photos. This is kind of around the entrances. Moving on to the sign. So the top is obviously what's there right now. The bottom is a rendering of what they'd like it to look like. It will be a new face painted in aluminum in 3 colors. The body is that blue shade, the trim is the brown, and then the lettering will be in that bottom color. The existing brick columns will remain. So here's their site plan. I've included this to show you where the monument sign is located. You can see I've circled in red up there to the northwest. It'll kind of be at the intersection of Roosevelt and Rio Concho. So moving on to the entry gates, these are a lifted arm type gate. They're controlled by a keypad, automatic sensors, and then they'll have small solar panel backups. The base of the machine is 42 inches tall, 14 inches wide, and 14 inches deep. The arm itself is somewhere around 10 feet long. As you can see, it's just striped red and white, and it does have an integrated LED. That way you can see it at nighttime. These gates will be located at all 5 entrances, as I've shown there with the little flags. This measurement varies, but they'll be set back anywhere from 10 to 23 feet away from their property lines. So this is kind of what the shade sail for the playground will look like. The fabric color will be a cobblestone gray sort of color. The support beams will be green painted steel. Obviously it's triangle in shape. Each side's around 25 feet long and it's 14 feet tall. It will be mounted in the ground, and as I mentioned earlier, it will be going over an existing playground that's interior to the lot, so it's not really that visible from the right-of-way. Here's just some photos of the like-for-like replacements that are up. So the windows, light pole fixtures, and basketball goals are all looking to be renewed. Of course, the windows and light pole fixtures are located all throughout the lot, so most of them are interior. Some of them you can see from the street, and the basketball goals are not really that visible from the right-of-way. With that, we are recommending approval of all the items, but if you have any questions, I'd be happy to try and answer them.
Anybody have any questions for staff?
Is there any fence or around the apartment complex?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
We'll open it up for public comment. Is there anyone here who'd like to speak about this project? Please come up to the podium, state your name.
Bella Cashel on behalf of ownership for this property. Just a couple things regarding, just some clarifications. The light pole fixtures, we have adjusted our scope of work for that, and it will be strictly just the light fixtures that are on the buildings, not on the poles themselves. And I believe the windows here and the basketball hoop all are like for like. Everything will be the same as that's already installed. And then I believe I was speaking with Sherry about this earlier regarding the entrance gates. I believe there is a 20-foot clearance required for the entry gates, but because of the gates, there is call boxes that are required. So, you know, typically call boxes are on the driver's side of those entry gates, and so that does kind of cut into that 20-foot clearance. And so I just wanted to kind of go over that and discuss maybe other options that we have, or if, you know, because the call boxes are required, if we can proceed as designed.
Anybody any questions, Beth? No?
Nope. Okay. That's all I had.
All right. Thank you very much. Anyone else? We will close public comment, open it to the board for suggestions, comments, approval.
Looks good.
Not at all look
Yeah.
great.
Someone
Yeah,
make a
be a nice
motion?
facelift to it, and I'm sure it'll look nice.
I think
Yeah,
it
it sounds
looks good
good.
too. I think it's a good improvement.
I'll move to approve.
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. We will now move to public comment. Issues or concerns not on the regular agenda may be raised by the public at this time. Citizens should speak from the podium, address all comments to the dais, and begin by stating their name and address or single member district number. Please limit all remarks to less than 3 minutes. Looks like we have no public comment. We will now move to training by the city attorney.
Good morning. Please click through. We used to do training on a kind of an annual basis, but it's been a while since COVID kind of stopped that process, and my office is just getting back into training the boards a little more directly. So what I want to talk about today is basically your authority under the Code of Ordinances, as well as some conversation about some of the open meeting requirements that come up with boards. I haven't seen any concerns really with this board, but just so that you're aware of some of those rules. So I want to start with, this commission is not one that we're required by statute to have. It is an option. These responsibilities can be assigned to the Planning Commission, but our council has decided they want to have this board, and they have designated that in Chapter 2 of our Code of Ordinances. It's in this section 2.07.001. There are some general requirements that cover all the boards of the city. Some of those are that the board members are appointed by council, that you serve without compensation. There's this attendance rule that a lot of people are not aware of, but if you miss 2/3 of the meetings in a one-year period, that is deemed to be an automatic resignation from the board unless your absences are excused. Generally, it's the board chair who excuses those absences. And there's just lots of rules, both at the statutory level as well as in our Code of Ordinances, that say you can't participate in any decision that you or your family members have an interest in. If that's ever a question for you, please contact my office and we can talk you through some of those rules to make sure that you are not participating improperly in any of these cases. Section 20701 has a couple more. Your terms are 2 years, and you can serve no more than 3 consecutive terms on the board. That does not count any term that's a partial term. So if one of you resigns and somebody fills that position for a partial, that does not go into the term limit. Division 5 is the specific duties related to the DHRC. And as I was preparing this, I think we all know the certificate of appropriateness decisions you make, and then the designation of historic areas or buildings is 2 of the things you primarily do, but there are a lot of duties that are spelled out in the code in various places. The first of these is Chapter 2. You are first and foremost an advisory commission to City Council in matters of this design review. Pretty much all of your decisions either have to be approved by council or there's an appeal process that can take them to council. We'll talk a little bit about one of the exceptions to that. We also focus a lot on historic preservation, but there's also a lot of development along the Concho River that's not historic preservation, but environmental preservation that you'll see are part of your duties, and that's something that I think are not always or typically brought to this board. As we talked about this morning already, 5 members is a quorum, and it takes 4 members to approve items except in some very limited circumstances. One of those you saw last meeting when we were approving the historic designation of the school building and the school district was not in favor. That's one circumstance where you do require a supermajority to approve. So here are some of your responsibilities. I don't want to read through all these, but I kind of want you to take note of some of this. Some of these responsibilities have been done by boards before you, such as conducting surveys and maintaining the inventory of those properties. Some of them are things that we take care of really frequently at these meetings. And I'm under the understanding that there are some processes in place now for you guys to be making some more recommendations to some of the guidelines and policies that we have, which is certainly within your responsibilities. Here are some more responsibilities you have. One thing that I'm not aware that we do, and perhaps I'm just not aware of it, is the conferring of recognition through plaques, certificates, or markers. I know that when I was in Abilene, my house had a marker on it from the city that said this is a historic property. That is definitely something. If we don't do that, you have the authority to do. Funding is sometimes an issue on doing that, but there's definitely authority. There's also, you're supposed to be making recommendations on any state, federal, or private funds that are related, one, to the preservation of open spaces and the promotion of preservation efforts. Again, that's not just historic, but that is also environmental preservation. And then further, that top one is what you primarily do in my experience. You approve or deny certificates for appropriateness. You're right now being asked to look at the design guidelines for the reviews. And if there are any structures out there that you think the city should buy or land that the city should buy because the property owner is clearly not able to take care of it, that's certainly other authority that you do have. And finally, tax abatements for sustainable development, acceptance of preservation easements, and then the very big catch-all, any other duties assigned by City Council. I have not found this council, any of the variations that I've experienced in San Angelo, to really direct boards in this way, but there are some councils that really take advantage of that kind of wide authority. So you're not just found in Chapter 2, you're found throughout the Code of Ordinances. This Section 216 of our zoning ordinance is another place where you are delegated these responsibilities as it relates to zoning. These two are also delineated in Chapter 2. First is reviewing and recommending to City Council designations of historic overlays. The process for that is actually spelled out in the Texas Local Government Code, and that is where it says that if the property owner is not in agreement, then it requires a supermajority. The other thing that it says is that both this board as well as council has to approve that by a supermajority. So this is one instance where you do have some final authority. Had you voted no on that school district building, it would never have gone to council for their opinion because both have to vote in the affirmative. And then also the rendering decisions on certificates of appropriateness. So if you are designating landmarks or districts, there is a recommendation from this board, but as I said, if you don't make the recommendation, it does not go to council, but then it does go to council. But there's some criteria. I think a lot of times we get very emotionally invested into buildings or areas of town based on our own personal experience, and all of that is valuable, but it's certainly not something that we can use solely to make these designations on. So when we're looking at historic designations, here are some of the criteria that are spelled out in the Code of Ordinances that you should consider. So it's things that you would expect. It's associated with historic events. It's the work of a master designer or craftsman. It has distinctive characteristics. It's a familiar visual feature of the city. There's artistic value, has prehistory or history. So none of those are unexpected criteria that you should use. But you'll notice the thing that's not included on there is like your personal preference. So to the most extent as we can, we need to keep personal preference or our own personal feelings out of these decisions and rely on the requirements of the code. So when you're looking at certificates of appropriateness, there is some provisions in the code. This is section 211 of the zoning ordinance. This is a different section where the planning director does have the authority to make some determinations. So if it's a like for like replacement, for instance, that is something that the planning director can do. There are appeals to this board from any of those decisions of the planning director. So he does not have final authority. But also there's criteria for approval of these. Again, it's not, I know you're accused occasionally of, following the whims of somebody else or just making decisions because that's what you want to do. But there are criterias that are listed in the code that you need to be following. So consideration to guidelines that apply. I have 2 copies, which you should have these. If you don't have these, please let staff know so you can have them, so you can be familiar. First is the Historic Preservation Design Guidelines. That's one copy of some policies that apply. And then there's the River Corridor Master Development Plan. This is a much thicker, a little bit more granular document than the design guidelines. But those, if they apply, should be considered in your decision-making. That does not mean we have an expectation that you guys on every case go out and dig through these and try to figure out what applies. When staff gives their staff report, this is what they're reporting to you. They're reporting to you how these guidelines apply to those properties. So it's very much a roadmap for you on how to make your decisions. It's also historic surveys or information about the properties that Ray did a really great job on the school district building, I think, talking about the history. And I think there's nobody in the room who doesn't understand the importance of the historic surveys and that information about these properties and making decisions. So there's some considerations you should make for the criteria for the designation. When you're looking at that, you should, of course, want minimal alterations to buildings or structures. I used to live in a historic home in Abilene, and it was basically the exact same structure. They had just closed in porches and done some things. But from the outside, it looked exactly like it would have looked back in 1920 when that house was built. You want to keep those distinguishing qualities and character. I hear you guys talk about that a lot. The removal of historic materials, that's an area that I think we have a little bit of controversy that comes up because sometimes it's so deteriorated it doesn't seem feasible. That is not a requirement that you keep it. There's an avoidance if it's possible. Discouraging any alterations that create earlier appearance. I haven't seen this a lot here, but there are some places where they really want newer downtowns to look older, so they're always trying to modify them away from their historic character to something that is, farther back in time. That should be discouraged. And there should be some consideration of changes that have taken place in the course of time. So I think the Roosevelt is a good example of that. The new design that was approved at the state level for the Roosevelt Hotel is different from the design that was initially approved here. But what they have done is they've taken off some of those alterations and returned it to a state that was even further back in the building's history than what we had initially approved. That doesn't mean that our approval of that building was improper, because we did take into consideration the changes that occurred over time and decided they were still appropriate to leave in place. Keeping those distinctive stylistic features. It breaks my heart whenever I see a building that has these beautiful cornices or something on the face of the building and they just want to cover that up. It just seems so wrong. Repairing deterioration rather than replacing. Cleaning as gently as possible. Sandblasting is one of those things that's greatly discouraged, although sometimes there's a recognition that that might be the only way to remedy a situation. We don't want it to look contemporary. And this last one, that if you are approving any additions, they should be easily removable so that once they're removed, the essential structure of the building remains intact. So there shouldn't be demos of exterior walls to add on additions that if they remove the addition, it's going to completely change the structure. And then there's also Section 212. It's like that commercial. And then there's more. You also get authority under Section 212, which is the River Corridor Downtown District and Cultural District. Here, you're responsible for reviewing any construction that's visible from the right-of-way. I think there's sometimes a desire or a need, or people ask, I'm changing something in the interior, does that apply? No, if it's not visible, then you don't have any authority over it. Any of those signs, 50 square feet or greater, which we saw today, the walls with advertisements or signs with messages. Telecommunication towers higher than 35 feet. Now, the aside on that is the Telecommunications Act really protects the ability for people to place those towers where they want. So your authority is like this big, but we will ask you your opinions on it. And then food trucks without temporary permits. So those are those food trucks, like Lone Star Burger used to be, that's there more permanently than just the ones that are there for a couple of days. So I think some important things to note as you make your decision are the guidelines are just that. Your professional opinions are necessary to qualify for some of the positions on the board. They're also very important to the city and the city council, that you have knowledge and experience that's very valuable in making these decisions. So that your professional opinion is important. And as I said, these are guidelines. How you apply those is based on your professional beliefs. What should not happen, and this is a criticism that I've heard about this board since I've gotten here, is that it can sometimes seem like it's just somebody's personal preference. We all have aesthetics that we find more attractive than others. And if you're basing a decision on, I just don't like that aesthetic, that's really not what you need to be focusing on. You need to be making sure it's complying with the guidelines and keep what's in the guidelines at the forefront of your mind and try to minimize as much as possible those personal preferences. You should try to keep your guidance to people at meetings. What I don't want you to do is get in a situation where, one, you're either accused of, well, I was promised something, but you weren't promised that because you had a conversation outside the meeting. And that often happens. They're like, well, I made this decision because I had a conversation with so-and-so, and then it got denied. And that really causes, a lot of conflict. But also, you don't want to get in a position where you're seen as overriding the authority of the board, or that you're kind of strong-arming somebody into making a design decision that you want to make in order to get approval of the board. That would not be appropriate, and so you really need to keep those kind of conversations with people outside of the meetings to a minimum. And then again, don't participate on items in which you have a financial interest. So, do we have any questions about that? It's a lot. When I was developing this, I was like, oh my gosh, there's so much authority in this board, and you maintain just a little bit of it and take over just a little bit of it, but what's possible for you to decide is really pretty broad. All right, let's talk about the Texas Open Meetings Act a little bit. The general rule for the Texas Open Meetings Act is that every regular meeting must be open to the public and comply with the requirements of the act. That means it has to be properly posted. Occasionally we have glitches in our posting system, which means something didn't get posted in time and we have to reschedule a meeting. That's because the act requires that it to be posted. Because this is just an advisory board, there's no authority under the act for us to go into closed or executive session. I've never had that request. I've only done this board a little bit, but I'm not aware of requests for this particular board wanting to go into an executive session to discuss things. Oftentimes, when it's a board making that request, it's because the conversation's uncomfortable and not really one that doesn't need to take place. So you don't have that ability, which means you don't have some of the responsibilities for executive session. Meetings do require that proper posting 72 hours before the meeting. Again, because it is an advisory board, there's not really going to be anything that's considered an emergency that's going to require or allow you to have less than 72 hours posting. Violations can result in fines and/or incarceration. I've not ever heard of anybody locally being incarcerated for these things, though it is, sometimes threatened amongst people. But there are people who have been incarcerated for these violations across the state of Texas, so it is a possibility. There's 4 ways to violate the act. Because you don't have executive sessions, 2 of them don't apply, so we won't talk about those. The first is knowingly conspire to circumvent the act by meeting in groups of less than quorum. So if you two decide to have a conversation, and then you two have a conversation, and you all know that everybody's conversing, that's 4 people talking about the business of the meeting, and that is a circumventing the act and is a violation. Calling or participating in a closed meeting. So if you all said, I don't care what city attorney says, I don't care what staff says, we're all going to get together on Monday night, we're going to have some drinks, and we're going to talk about the business of the meeting before we meet, that would be number 2, calling or participating in a closed meeting. I've not had an issue with, I've not heard anybody having an issue with violations of one, but my experience is across my career, when boards are violating the act, that's what they're doing. They're having these little mini conversations, but everybody knows they're having them, and over time, it leads to a quorum. Are there any questions about any of that? All right, and then subcommittees. I know that there's some policy work going on. If you're doing any subcommittee work, the thing that you really need to keep in mind is you can't meet in a quorum, even a walking quorum like we discussed before. So just be cautious when you're doing subcommittees that we're obeying all the quorum rules. If we need to have a workshop, that's certainly an opportunity for this board to meet. Workshops are different, where it's just a discussion of business. There's no action taken. There's no public comment on those things. It's just an open discussion. So that's a possibility as well. And then social media. I don't know if any of y'all are big into social media. This is kind of, I think people are walking away from social media a little bit because it causes so much drama, but quorum provisions can be met if there's 4 of you talking about an item on a social media post. So if a citizen says, I'm going before the board, here's my project, and 4 of you say, I love it, in the comments, that constitutes a meeting. So just be very careful about commenting about issues that come before you on social media, particularly if it hasn't already been decided. And then public comment, we have some new public comment rules that were adopted by council. They do apply to all boards of the city. So there's a couple of changes you should be aware of. Generally, the public comment at this board is not a concern, but we will move all public comments to the beginning of the meeting for all boards, and there will be a sign-in sheet that staff will be responsible for having people sign in. They're going to have to indicate what they want to talk about, which item, and those are the items they'll be called to talk about. There's also some priority given to people who are citizens versus non-citizens, but I don't think this board's going to see much difference other than the sign-in requirement and moving it to the beginning of the meeting.
Can staff or somebody, what if somebody wants to talk about public comment that's just out there?
Well, that's one reason we want them.
Can that be regulated, or is it just whatever anybody
Yeah.
wants to say?
The new rules require the sign-in requirement, so if it's something that this board does not have control over, then we're not going to allow those kind of comments. So everything
So
should be
they'll
read.
kind of vet
Yeah,
that out?
they'll vet that out ahead of
Okay.
time. And you won't call for people, you'll say it's public comment, staff will call people by name to come up and offer their comments
Okay.
on particular items. So we're kind of like taking some of the authority maybe away from the chair, but it's in an effort to like try to regulate that a little bit better.
So if you're having a meeting on a board and you've had public comment, is it at all appropriate for one of the public to make a comment as an issue comes up? during
Only
the
if they
meeting?
sign in ahead of time.
But they can comment about the specific thing that they.
Yes.
At that point.
Yeah. So that's one reason for the sign-in sheet. They will indicate what items they do want to speak on.
So like when they present a case and then I say it's open for public comment, they would have to sign in with that to talk about their
They would have to
case?
sign in before the meeting begins. Yes, everybody will need to sign in. And that's partly for record keeping for our staff as well as maintaining some decorum as public comment happens. But the other big change is that we're not going to allow you to come up and just like talk about whatever. It has to be relevant to the authority of the city. These are, in essence, business meetings, and we
Okay,
need
I
to
have
keep
another
them.
question. Okay, so when it says public comment and somebody just wants to come up and talk about stuff or whatever, and then when the case comes up and somebody wants to talk about just the case, that's all they can talk about?
Yes,
Okay. All right.
you need to sign up for both. So when you sign your name, you'll indicate what areas of the meeting you want to sign up for. Yeah, and so it doesn't happen a lot, but
Well, what-
occasionally somebody will be like, I didn't intend on talking about this, but now that I hear this, I have a grand opinion about it. So they'll want to give that. That's not going to be allowed
Got
anymore.
another question. Okay, say if somebody has something to do with this case, say whatever, this case today, then there's somebody else in the audience that said, oh, now I really want to say something, but they didn't
They
say
didn't sign
anything
in,
about it.
yeah.
They can't say
No.
anything. Okay.
At that point in time, they
That's
don't
it.
get to.
Unless you're signed up, you're done.
Yeah, and that's not
Better
uncommon.
figure.
That's very different. We actually operate public comment much differently than most entities do. Pretty much everybody across the board requires you to sign in and indicate what you're going to talk about. It's going to feel different for us, but it's very common.
And is it always a city staff person in this kind of meeting that takes those sign-ins?
It's the person who keeps the minutes, so, which I believe on all of our boards is a city staff person. So it'll be the city clerk in council meetings, it'll be Sherry, yes, you take the minutes? Yep, Sherry for this meeting. And of course, you know, most if not all the boards have an attorney presence. We are always happy to jump in and say, you can't talk right now.
Seems like I did a lot better.
Yeah.
Clean things up.
Yeah, we're trying to clean it up a little bit.
Yeah.
We're trying to maintain the right of people to speak to us, but also to like address the decorum issues we've been having lately, as well as to make sure it's orderly and clear what they're speaking about.
Okay.
And then this one comes up, I mean, this has come up at this board, it comes up very frequently, that public comment should be the members of the community talking to you to help you make a decision. It's not their time to interrogate staff, it's not their time to better understand an issue. They are welcome to contact staff outside of a meeting to do that. It really is giving you knowledge and experiences of theirs that you need to make a good decision. And so a lot of the conflict we have comes when somebody wants to like interrogate everybody in the room and get an argument. they need to make a comment and then sit down. It's always, of course, appropriate for the board to say, you know, I'm really interested in what their question was, and then you can ask staff a question. You are welcome to ask any member of staff questions. You can call somebody else up from the audience, but that's the chair's determination. The people making comments are there to provide information, not necessarily receive it. All right, that's it. I know that's not the most exciting training you've ever received, and I'm sorry about that. You are a very regulated board that has a lot of policies and, you know, provisions in our code to deal with, but if you ever have any questions, please don't hesitate to contact staff or my office, and we will help you, guide you through those things. So are there any other questions?
I'd love to get a copy of those, just to make
Yes,
sure I
I
have
was gonna-
the right stuff.
Which,
Whatever those 2 packets you have.
Oh,
or
okay.
Email them to
Yeah.
me is fine.
And we're actually putting together, Barb,
Good.
David's and I'm putting together a handout for all of you. It's a book.
And that will be in it?
And that-
Perfect,
Yes.
perfect.
Great.
And I think reviewing that will help you have a little more understanding of the recommendations they make sometimes.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
I'd
Great.
love for us to have a workshop too. I don't know if y'all, I mean, if we could do that, that'd be
Yeah,
I think
great.
that'd be helpful.
Sure.
Could we, what do we do to get that scheduled?
We certainly could do that. The question would be the timing of that. Is that before we go through and do some of the guidelines and then bring those guidelines back as a workshop to go over them and get everybody's feedback? And then we could bring them forward as an actual action item, you know, in a meeting after that.
I think it might be good once we get the book together
Yeah,
and
once
all
you get a
that,
little
then
bit
we
further
can-
down, but yeah, I
we're-
think-
We're setting all that up right now.
Perfect.
October,
that'd be good.
November, that would probably be good to set a workshop.
I would
Perfect.
still like to see that, you know, the little book from Lubbock with the style, building styles, and where you have an easy reference to this represents this style of architecture. I think, you know, for people who haven't been in architectural studies, that's important.
Yes.
Yeah,
And
that,
I know the Texas Historic Commission has come to town before and done programs on early commercial work and the kind of things to look for that we see all up and down the streets here.
Yes.
Once they tell you what you're looking at, it's just great.
Yeah, it's, to really be educated on that stuff, it takes quite a bit, and I know that's even important for our own staff, not just the board members, to really understand what's that structure in front of us. So anything like that, I think, is very helpful, and anything that can get into a board book and a staff book is going to be very helpful for them to understand the architectural style of that building, and trying to make recommendations to you guys of what should happen or shouldn't happen based on a renovation project.
And I've contacted the Historic Commission, and they're sending me some samples and some things that we can use and replicate. So we'll be looking that through and putting that together as a workshop also.
That'd be great.
Yeah, when you take a look at these historic preservation design guidelines, it does have a little bit of information about that. So it shows different styles of architecture, what characteristics you should look for. You know, what is a cornice? I mean, it has some
and
definitions.
actually,
on
the
that.
book they're putting together has all that in it too, with the colors and everything. I had a book from way back that had all that in it.
I just think that's good education for all of us.
Is
And-
this book going to be available like in a PDF or something where we can?
You'll each have a copy.
Yeah,
Well,
yeah,
and
they're
it-
gonna make us
Is it a copy?
And it will be available for citizens too, because they need to know that too, as they're trying to make decisions on buildings that fall within your jurisdiction. They need to know, well, this is what they're gonna tell me, so I need to know that up front. So yes, it will be.
And it'll be, I'm hoping that it's going to be online.
Yes, yes.
Good.
And I think, I know that Sherry's working on this, but I think, you know, one of the things that it confuses me, and I know it confuses the public, is, you know, what are the historic district and the historic buildings versus the downtown district? And what are the requirements for that? What are the, you know, and what specific are the overlays? And then what is the river corridor, and what are the specific requirements for that? And then the cultural districts as well. And so it's just, sometimes it's difficult when you see buildings. I think it was the one on Oaks, the old Sealy Flats building, which,
Yes.
you know, I don't think that was technically historical district, but I think it was still
No.
downtown district.
I think it's
And
downtown
So it's like,
district, yes, sir.
what are we?
Yeah, everything's-
But it was kind of being, you know, but I think folks, it was hard to sort of make that distinction. Anyway, so I think having that kind of understanding in what our guidelines are going forward, I think is super helpful. And so I know that Sherry's working on that, so that's,
And you're going to see the staff report change as we add all of this information into it and address it, and particularly the items that you need to have as you're making a determination. We used to have that a long time ago. We got away from it. We're going
Yeah,
back.
good. That'd be good.
And we are working towards, once we kind of get some of our guidelines readjusted of, let's go back and clean up so that we don't have these overlapping districts. And then if you do have what's considered a contributing building in a whatever district, that means something, but y'all would have that availability. So would the citizens say, oh, well, that building's a contributing building and that building's not. And so we're working towards that.
Perfect, that'd be great.
Good.
One thing I get asked a lot by public or, is what is the consequences when they leave here and they don't do what they say they're gonna do? Or is that out of our realm, or do we have any guidelines? Is it the honor system? I don't know about any of that. Do we need to develop that?
Well, we can-
What?
Well,
What's the
as
deal?
Teresa kind of
Run into
thumbs
that
through some
before.
stuff,
Yeah,
I mean, the essential is it a zoning violation out of the zoning ordinance, which that's where y'all have some of your authority through. And so there is the real potential that there's a zoning ordinance problem. I would say quite a bit of the folks out there that actually come here do a majority of what you ask them to do. Our bigger problem is those that don't come to us at all. And sometimes they're not significant changes. They might just be a sign change or a paint color change on a building that may already be painted, but they don't come to you guys. And so those are still violations. And we're going to have to really work through with our code department as well as working with our building department, where we have a position that's going to be hired as someone that is part building codes and part planning ordinances to deal with some of those items. Of course, they're going to have a very high load if we throw everything at them. But there really are, it really is a violation, and then how we deal with that, whether that's a please correct it and here's so much time, is it a citation over time, is it a citation every day? I know there's a building in downtown that y'all will be dealing with that here very soon.
Yeah, if you tear something up that's historic, you can't replace it.
That's really problematic, yes.
Yeah.
Well, a lot of
So-
it too, what we approve here, sometimes they don't do what we approve, so.
And then we're doing it for nothing. It's all
Well,
for nothing.
but then they cannot give them, occupancy certificate of that. There's ways to.
True.
We can shut
And
them
that's why
down that way.
we
So
try to
there's-
prevent that going all the way through a certificate of occupancy. And David and I have had a conversation, which I think is absolutely fair, of if there's something that y'all have decided, and you've seen a few times that maybe in the report or sometimes on the slides, with minor modifications approved by the director or something similar to that. Well, if they've come to us and asked city staff, hey, we want to change this from blue to red, whatever that, while we have the authority to do that, it's also fair to come back and tell you guys, hey, we made that decision on that, and just let you know that. So when you drive by and you're like, well, I know we talked about that one, but I thought it was going to be this color or that style or whatever, city staff may have decided to change the color for some reason. I don't know what the justification would be, but there could be a justification. But I think it's fair that you guys know that that has been changed so that you're not wondering, well, what happened there?
Well, and I
And
think
didn't we,
all of those things that y'all said are, yes, I mean, we have enforcement capabilities. But again, going back to that slide, talking about things to avoid, that's why we want you to base your decisions on standards that are already codified in some way. Because if it's just a personal preference, it's really hard for us to win that argument in court. They really want us to be making sure your decisions are based on a policy and not personal preference.
and didn't we put in place, when something doesn't come before our board and it's administrative approval, that we will be notified of that? Because I kind of got into tiff over that on a project.
Yeah, I think
I
that
didn't
makes a lot
know
of
that
sense.
that was done that way.
When we send the approval letter to the applicant, that we can blind copy you guys that, hey, we made this approval at
It
this.
would be nice, yeah.
That
because-
wouldn't be a bad idea to do that, just so you're aware of it, because you might be
Yeah.
driving by and seeing work done, and you're like, whoa, that's in
Well,
a
that's what
design
happened,
district.
because I look at everything and
Yeah,
then
I think that makes a lot of sense.
I
mean,
didn't
that's-
know that it was done that way.
The caveat, and Teresa will probably mention that, is that, when you're blind copied, you don't want to reply to all, and then now you've just made that approval letter a meeting. You know, that's the challenge with email. But
Sure.
at the same time, that's an effective communication tool for us to let you know what's happened.
Yeah, good.
I also think that kind of an overarching thing here, and this, might be a downtown San Angelo type situation, but education of the citizenry over what exists in our downtown, and for any potential buyers of property to know the value is huge. So, public workshops.
Yeah, I do believe we're going to work towards that goal. Sherry and I have talked a number of times about that, and she's actually talking with Monica and her team quite often about things. And I think that's somewhere we would love to head, whether it's twice a year, a quarterly thing that we're just doing some education out there about our process, about buildings that are around, and trying to break down that barrier of, well, I don't want to buy that building because the city's going to throw a bunch of rules at it. What can we do to bring that communication level down to, okay, you really can do these types of things? And it kind of goes hand in hand with the Tiers Board too, that, hey, there might be some funding available for that in some manner. And so I think it's a cooperative effort on that.
Well, and if they have education, it builds value for what is historic. So then it's less of a conflict with where we're trying to go.
You may have noticed on one of the slides I presented that that's specifically within the authority given to this board by the council, so there's an agreement there that that is a necessary part of historic preservation.
Good. Good conversation. Any
Yeah.
other comments?
Y'all are doing a great job, by the way, you guys.
Okay, everybody done? We'll move on to announcements. The next regular meeting of the Design and Historic Review Commission is scheduled to begin on Thursday, August 15th, 2024 at 10 a.m. in the East Mezzanine Meeting Room in City Hall at 72 West College Avenue. Can I get a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
So move.
Thank you.
Thank you.